Hey guys, before this video starts, I want to give a big thanks to Beside the Dying Fire for helping me out on this video. He's a talented narrator, and there's a lot of great content over on his channel. His creepypasta radio series is awesome, so I definitely recommend you check him out. And be sure to subscribe, because there can never be too much great horror content, right? So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy. My aunt had a near-death experience when she was 18. She always suffered from chronic seizures that made her pass out. One day, she had one while no one was around. She was later found by my grandmother. The doctors luckily arrived in time to resuscitate her. She explained that she was in the brightest, most peaceful hallway. She wandered aimlessly through it until she found a massive door closed on one end. She told my grandmother that she tried as hard as she could to open the door. Tapping, slamming, even kicking it would not allow the door to break free. She looked back to see the back of the corridor gone, replaced with an emergency room. She was lying on a stretcher while multiple nurses and doctors were frantically working to revive her. She gave up on the door, turned around, and went into the surgery room. She eventually reached the room and re-entered her body. She passed away at the age of 42, about 9 months ago. Heart failure after multiple seizures. She left behind 2 young daughters and a husband. We like to think that the doors finally opened for her.
A man came and spoke to one of my classes this semester about his near-death experience. And it gave me great comfort, so I wanted to share it here. He was kayaking with a friend and ended up flipping his kayak and being sucked under by the current. He was sucked into a pipe underwater and struggled to get out, almost made it, and was sucked back in. He passed out, and his friend saw his lifeless body being tossed down the river. This is how he described his experience in the moments he was unconscious. He was in a dark place, almost like a cave, only the walls were soft and velvety. At the end of this cave was a beautiful kaleidoscope of colors. He made it sound similar to a stained glass window. And on the other side of this colored glass, dark figures were passing by. He said that all sense of time was lost, and it felt like his wife and kids would come join him at any minute. He said it was the most comforting and peaceful feeling he has ever experienced. He said that he had the strong sense that God wanted him and everyone there so badly, and that you must have to do something pretty terrible to go to hell, because he wasn't the greatest of guys before this. His friend was able to catch up to his body and revive him, and he said he now feels a stronger connection with everyone and is grateful to have had this experience. Hope this was calming to some of you, like it was to me. Some of the posts on here are pretty scary.
Growing up, my father used to tell me of an experience he had while having open heart surgery. The doctors had to stop his heart for about 20 or 30 minutes while they inserted a mechanical valve into it. At the time, he was in his early 20s and was involved in a lot of bad activity that he says he's ashamed of now. Anyway, while my dad was technically dead, he said he was in a very dark place, and as he wandered around, he started running into very scary people who were deformed and screaming at him. He ran for his life into a corner and hid, and just before the people got him, he looked up and saw his deceased grandmother reach her hand down and grab him. The next thing my dad remembered, he was back in the hospital. He's convinced he was temporarily in hell. I don't know if this was just a dream state or something, but I've never seen my dad so convinced in his life. It was enough for him to turn his life around and turn to religion, and more importantly, come back to his family that he had left behind.
My mom's root canal got infected and she died for 5 minutes. She said she saw a river or a darkness like a river, and on the other side was just others. She didn't describe what they looked like, but she knew it was others like her somehow. Then from behind, someone touched her and said, "It's not time yet." Then she woke up and would not stop asking who just touched her shoulder. The doctors were all confused and kept saying, "No one touched your shoulder, you were just dead." She became a born-again Christian after that, and is a firm believer in Christ. For some perspective, I am full-blown atheist. I believe that what she told me is what she truly believes, but I can't say I believe that what she perceived is an afterlife. The mind sends out all types of chemicals when you're in a situation like that, and it could have been any number of things. But she definitely thinks it was some version of the Christian afterlife.
When I was 12, I drowned in the Gulf of Mexico. I was out pretty far from my family, and the current picked up into a rip. I had always been a very strong swimmer, and I knew what to do, swim parallel. On this occasion, I wore myself out and started to sink beneath the water. I remember struggling to breathe. Then, I took a big breath of water, and everything stopped. The only way I can describe it is by saying I was at zero. I wasn't scared or excited. I was just zero. I was looking through the water and I blacked out. During that time, my mother was swimming out to me. She'd been a surfer all her life and pulled me to shore and gave me CPR until I coughed up water. There was something eerily comforting about being at zero.
I OD'd on some sleeping pills when I was young and stupid and heartbroken. I hadn't thought much about the consequences of what would happen afterwards, except I wouldn't feel this overwhelming pain anymore. The shock of the absolute nothingness I experienced for a few moments brought me enough strength to crawl back to town and get taken to the hospital. The 5 or so minute ride to the hospital was me fighting it with everything I had, and every time I slipped over, the horribleness of it made me fight just a little harder. I was too exhausted to fight it once I got to the hospital. A preacher read me my last rites and I was out. Luckily, I woke up a couple of days later. I've been worse off emotionally a few times since then, but suicide never crosses my mind. There are no emotional troubles that are as awful as that sliver of nothingness I felt. My life is great now, and I'm so thankful I'm alive. I've experienced so many great things since then, I can't believe I ever thought I had nothing to live for.
I hung myself with my dog's leash almost a year ago. All I remember is letting go of the leash and just hanging there for a minute. It wasn't enough of a shock, like stepping off of a chair, so I was suffocating, and time just seemed to slow down. I felt my heartbeat in my arms and legs, and I felt it start to fade. I remember what I've come to call the big empty in my therapy groups as just plain nothingness. It's hard to describe, and some people on this thread have managed it quite well, but my description would be a void. There's no darkness, there's no you, there's nothing. It's such a complete lack of anything at all that it can't even be described as empty, because that would imply it could be filled with something. It's hard to even realize that it exists, because you can't even really perceive it. A near-death experience like mine, I think, is like peering at the void but not going in. Just enough life left to know it's there, and not enough death to be engulfed and completely extinguished by it. My nosy neighbor apparently witnessed me through the window, broke said window, and cut me down within 10 minutes. I was out for 3 days afterwards, but I have since fully recovered and finished my inpatient and outpatient program with the Youth Services Bureau and have completely turned my life around. The fear of the big empty still haunts me, and knowing that I will have to face it again one day and lose.
I'm not sure whether I was clinically dead. I can only speculate, but I suspect I was, so. I was struck by lightning as a child, a direct hit. I lost about 3 to 5 minutes in total, during which I was likely dead. Fun fact, your brain and heart can react to lightning strikes by hard rebooting multiple times, in a process that looks like, but is different from, arrhythmia or brain death. The things I saw and heard made me believe the world I had entered was liquid. Thick liquid. Flowing, but just barely. And with audible ebbs and flows in the background. Shapes were distorted, but recognizable. I found myself a bit stunned by how quickly I adapted to the logic of the place. And not only accepted, but even predicted how things would occur in a liquid world. A decade later, I read an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Crawling Chaos, and the way he describes his opium fever dream was very similar in style, if not substance, to how my mind reacted to death. I have to assume that all of this was backfilled, as I obviously wasn't producing new memories or sensations when I was out.
When I was 8, I learned how to fix small engines. That being said, my dad had an old, flathead Briggs & Stratton 5.5 horsepower engine that didn't work. He also had a riding lawnmower that had no engine or blades. He gave me the task of getting the engine running, and I could put it in the riding lawnmower and drive it around. Well, that day, I tore apart the motor and had it running by bedtime. The next day, we had the thing mounted and riding around. Flash forward a few weeks. Me and my older sister were out riding when my shoelace got caught on the back spindle. It pulled me off and was dragging me. Mind you, only going as fast as it would go. My sister stopped and went in reverse, which caused her to go right onto me. The chain and chain wheel caught my lower right back, ripping my skin open and pulling my large and small intestine out, severing my right lung, breaking my spine in 2 places, and shredding my right kidney. I felt the thing roll onto me, and everything went blank. I couldn't see, move, speak, or anything. I felt no pain. All I remember was the blackness. After my father got my heart beating again, I remember lying there in pain. I also remember feeling my back and short of breath. I felt what I still believe is my stomach in my hand. Once I was in the ambulance, everything went blank, except this time I saw myself laying there and the medic shocking me. I felt a hard pull and I was back inside myself. A few minutes later, I was on a table with strangers in white all around me. I remember them in a panic, then standing next to my grandmother, who passed when I was 3. She told me she was my Nana. We stood there, watching them jolt my heart with tiny round paddles. She kept telling me it was okay. They called my death at 6:06 p.m. Then, all of a sudden I wake up, and I'm all fixed and stapled up. My parents told me that I had died 3 times. The first for 5 minutes, the second more than 12, but the last time was astonishing the doctors. My heart stopped beating for 20 minutes. My parents made them continue jolting my heart, and they told me the doctor kept telling them that I was going to have a 98% chance of being brain dead. I'm 25 years old now, and healthy as ever.